there's this big debate with AI, right? Does this create just like massive fragmentation where everyone just has totally bespoke little software applications that fit their need? Or do you find that there's platforms that can be adaptive to the needs and so can take a general solution and make it adaptive to others? We've taken the perspective of the latter, which is we have a general solution that's based on really hard math and really like intense simulation and modeling under the covers. And we can adapt that to the specific workflows and use cases that we've gone out with and found that our clients have. I think time will tell.
Welcome to Blue Ocean by StartOps. Each episode, I sit down with leaders in consumer brand supply chain, finance, and CX to talk about the problems they're facing and the solutions they're using or building. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Cushing, the founder of StartOps. With me here today is Michael Rossiter, co-founder and CEO of Atomic. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Charles. This is awesome. It'll be fun to talk about all things planning.
Really stoked to get into it. And yeah, even our little pre-chat, you had some concepts that I'm excited to dive further in on. But to kick things off, just for anyone who doesn't know Atomic, could you just give us the one-liner on what it is and what you do?
Yeah, so Atomic, we call ourselves an instant upgrade to planning that happens today in spreadsheets. So demand planning through supply planning. And we've been having a lot of fun with it and had it for a couple of years now.
And maybe we can even kind of start at the beginning. My understanding, correct me if this is wrong, but it feels like from what you've told me before, Atomic was born out of your experience as the director of sales operations at Tesla.
That's right.
Want to roll it back for us? Like what were you doing at Tesla? What was happening there? And how did this emerge from that?
Yeah, so I was at Tesla from 2016 to 2018. So right in that core of like the Model 3 ramp. And a lot of the time was getting ready for Model 3 and then the explosive growth of Model 3 launching and shooting up that ramp. And we went from 2 billion in revenue to 20 billion in revenue during the time that I was there with a physical good that was produced in a factory. And I joined to run business planning for North America. So kind of like that sales planning role of what are our targets and how do we hit the targets and what are each of the stores responsible for? And pretty quickly got pulled into running demand planning, order operations, inventory, like all of the commercial functions around supporting that execution of the sales plan. And we had a very specific model of how we were running Model S and Model X and what that business looked like in the value chain. And then Model 3 was the mass market product that was going to shoot up our growth. And we effectively totally changed the value stream construct mid-flight, which was an amazing, crazy experience in time. And so a lot of just like the grind and the battle and the lessons learned there kicked off, for us, that the learnings that we have ultimately now taken us into Atomic.
What was your sort of role specifically in all that? I don't know if you have any like war stories you can share from your time that like drove home the point of what you're doing now, but that'd be fun to hear if you have them.
Yeah, so I was one of the 3 people who were responsible for running S&OP. So I had a counterpart in production and a counterpart in supply chain, and I was representing the commercial side of the business. And our S&OP at Tesla was a weekly meeting on Monday afternoon where you like any S&OP, you bring together how are we tracking to the plan for the quarter, how are we doing on the sales side, on production, on outbound and deliveries and so forth, and making sure that that all fits together. And when I came in, Model S and X was a custom order business. And so the whole system works really well if you can fill the factory with demands. Like if you have too much demand, you just take the order from the customer, they go online, they configure it. There are 200,000 SKUs for S and X. So totally custom. Take the order, you hand it to the factory, say, build this. And there's, some load balancing in the build plan to make sure that you're not building too many S's or too many X's or different battery sizes, but it wasn't an overwhelming challenge. It was hard. And we had a very small team working on it. The demand planning team at Tesla at like 2 billion in revenue was 4 people, right? It was a homegrown ERP called Warp, actually a great piece of software, and then spreadsheets to figure out the rest of the plan. And the team did a great job, but we made lots of mistakes, as you would expect that you would do in spreadsheets. Things like, we had one version of the plan that the order operations team created, which was regional allocation. And we had another version of the plan, which the demand planning team built, which was capacity constraint management with the build plan. These were not linked. Like, they sat down and looked at them together and in aggregates made sure that they kind of sorted themselves out, but they weren't linked at like a unit level to say, we know that the units in this plan and the units in this plan actually tie out. That would lead to issues where we would get called into meetings with the head of production planning, and he'd be like, he'd have this great guy, like have like this whiteboard, and he would be like writing numbers, and he'd be like, you guys are trying to take cars here and move them over here, and you're trying to sneak things in. And we're like, Bob, we're not trying to sneak things in. Like, no, we're not as clever to like try to pull a fast one on you. It's just how it all shook out. So that was the context, right? Of just trying to keep our heads above water on like a relatively simple problem. There were lots of ways that it was very hard, but relative to then Model 3, where the business was constantly in this state of cash crunch, constantly in a state of like, how do we turn cars into cash as quickly as possible? So the mandate is the car has to leave the factory and get to the customer and cannot stop moving, which when it's a custom order car is achievable because you already know who that car is going to. You built it for them. But in Model 3, we wanted to shrink the cash conversion cycle more so where they can order a car and then a week or two later they can get it. And so you needed to know what car were they going to order in that logistics lane and that configuration and have built it already and have it there waiting for them in like a just-in-time mode. But now you're going into a world, like, how do you do that, right? So we dropped SKU count a lot. So it wasn't 200,000, it was like a few hundred. So that helped a ton. But still, at that time, that scale of the business, if you're talking about 5,000, 10,000 units a week, and you have 500 configurations and like, let's say 10 logistics lanes, you're already trying to perfectly guess what people are going to order. There's no way to do it. And so that was the challenge that we had of how do we basically build a system that can be responsive and make sure we have the right car. We've built the right cars and put them in the right place at the right time without blowing up the supply chain, right? So we're observing supply chain constraints on a 2-year lead time parts from China and like all this sort of fixed production constraints and reconcile this overall system. So that was what we launched off against. And I had some great people on the team, including Neil Sweetan, CEO at Atomic. Now, he and I and a couple other folks there put our heads together and said, like, how are we going to do this? And we looked externally a bit, and the external options were, 2-year build out, right? And we looked internally to our product and engineering team internally, and they said, don't worry, we've got you. We'll have this awesome suite. They mapped out, here's how it's going to work. We think it's going to work. It's not in the backlog yet. It's not queued up for us to build yet, but like it's on our roadmap, right? Like when? So 12 to 18 months. If we have cars coming out of the factory today, I'm sorry, like, what do we do? So fortunately, Neil and a few other members of the team, like new SQL, new Python, they just started coding and built a framework and an approach that was able to reconcile all of these considerations and build the right cars and then put them in the right place at the right time.
Wow. It just home rolled it basically.
Yeah, just by necessity, right?
And I want to get more now into like what your product does do, but you built a product for enterprise, right? Like a really big company. And yet this time around, you've sort of chosen to focus on more of like the mid-market or, to everyone. Why choose the path that you've taken versus sticking with the bigger side of the market?
We went and talked to a ton of planners, which is what you would do if you're doing it right, if you're starting something. Because we first wanted to validate if our experience was unique or if this was generally true. Like, is everyone planning in spreadsheets? Is everyone just kind of like juggling? Like, so we had that experience. Like, is that generally true? It's like, yeah, that's generally true that folks like us are smart people who are holding it together through just force of will and determination. And the reason is like you're already super underwater when you're running planning. There's already a trust deficit internally of like, hey, why did we miss? And trying to reconstruct that from spreadsheets, or like, why did we make this decision? You go back 3 months ago and find a spreadsheet that was like the reason we made this decision. Then your solutions to do something different or to get yourself some relief are generally solutions that take, 6 months, 12 months to onboard. And we saw it as like there's this huge like trust deficit. There's this huge leap of faith that you have to go through in order to adopt something that's not spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are actually awesome, right? They're like you have full visibility, you have full control, it recalculates really quickly. So they're great, but they're actually just like a prototyping tool. And then you're trying to run a production system in a prototyping tool and it starts to break and it's hard to maintain and update. And so anyway, this is like all the diagnosis that we went through is like, why hasn't there been a really good solution here? Are folks happy with what's out there? And it's like, no, we're generally not happy with our options because it's either something that's like enterprise grade that takes a really long time to implement, but it's very rigid. And we end up doing our work outside of the system for the most part anyway in spreadsheets and then pushing it back. Or we can get something fast, but it's like narrow and it's hard to customize. Maybe if you're lucky, you're in an industry where there's like a vertical specific solution that really fits your workflow in that vertical. And so you can like get by with something that solves for that. So we looked at this whole landscape and said, okay, we believe that we have a generalized solution that can apply to any situation where demand is matching to supply. And we can build a unit level simulation that like observes all these constraints and puts the right inventory, finished good product in the right place at the right time to support the demand that's coming in. Like, where do we start? Because this is actually like a really huge problem. And yeah, we're like, if we went to enterprise, we could do that. But we want to think of this as like building blocks, like module by module building blocks, where if ultimately our goal would be to be able to support as complex use cases of something like a Tesla, we wouldn't start there. We'd actually start in more configurable supply chains that are somewhat simpler and start building there and start proving what it takes to get there. I think what we found is even those contexts are still like quite complex and it's quite challenging, right? That was the intentionality of why we wanted to start there. I think since we've started there and brought on a lot of customers and working in the space, we've been really happy with that decision because we can like learn quickly, build the right solution, and it's like a great set of people that we get to work with.
You mentioned a second ago at the lower end of the market, tools tended not to sort of be, they were sort of still too rigid, right? So like, what was like the why now for you, or what insight did you feel like you had different from the rest of the market that was like, okay, well, we can fix this. We know how to fix this.
I think our initial hypothesis was that we have this underlying generalized solution that, because it's a unit level simulation, can apply to any context. And so then it's configurable. So all the business rules and constraints and settings are configurable to any context. And then we can make those reusable modules and configurations that we can apply to those contexts. That's been generally true, but harder than we thought, candidly. Like, harder to make it generalized than we initially thought, just because every company really is unique.
What's like a specific example of something that like broke your hypothesis or broke your tool that you had to like accommodate?
There's just so much nuance that every company has. Like even the smallest thing, like, hey, sometimes when we sell something, it's in a 1-pack and sometimes it's in a 6-pack. And how do you think about the kitting of 1-pack to 6-pack, right? It's like, yeah, we can model that. That's fine. But there's like 50 of those that you have to be able to accommodate in order to have a full reusable, flexible stack of components that can then map even just like a finished goods use case. So it's not that it's not doable. It's just that there was a lot more detail than we thought, which makes sense, which is why everyone's in spreadsheets, because any tool is not going to be able to capture all the little nuances that you're trying to do.
I feel like for all these tools, they're kind of, from my outsider's view of it, you tell me if this is right, but it's like they're kind of three hangups. Like One is just business logic. And sometimes companies themselves don't have this documented or don't fully understand it, or it's not keeping consistent. Second is data inputs, right? People are on random marketplaces. They don't have an API. Like, how do you even get that out of the system, right? And I'd be curious to hear about your sort of sources and sinks and how you think about that problem. And then there's like the human factor of, well, whatever. Yesterday we learned marketing actually ran a promo that they said nothing about, but actually now we've sold out, this location or whatever. If you could touch on, each of those, I'd be curious how, because everyone has got like a different philosophy about how to handle these things, but curious how you do.
Yeah, these generally align to how we think about the business, which is control, visibility, and speed, right? So the first is I have unique business logic. I need to be able to enforce control over whatever system I'm using to make sure that it represents the business logic that I want to use. And that's why people end up back in spreadsheets, because, hey, this can do like 80% of what I want or 50% of what I want. But then the last bit, it can't capture that unique business logic. And then I find myself going back to spreadsheets anyway. Very persistent problem. The way we solve that is in our onboarding, actually, before we even like sell a customer, we do this live demo with the client's data because we want them to be able to see that it works in Atomic. And the main three things we're doing there is we have them present to us, how do you do planning today? Like walk through your spreadsheets, walk through your data sources. What is all the logic you're using? How are you combining these things? And sometimes joke that's like room rater for planning spreadsheets because we've seen so many at this point, and they all have like that flow. They all have a certain consistency of I bring in data, I do some sort of run out math, and then that drives what decisions I need to make. But then all the bespoke business logic gets exposed of like what are they doing? And so we get to see together if it's something that is a good fit or not. And then we go and we put it into Atomic and show how the workflow is actually going to work for them. So there's no like, this is like the big leap of faith issue. Hey, I've never spent money on this category of software before. I believe there's ROI. I don't know if there's ROI, right? Now I get to see it before I dive in and have confidence that's actually going to work. We've built Atomic as this very configurable, customizable platform so that we can, in most cases, the vast majority of cases, we can accommodate that unique business logic. And if there's areas that we can't, at least going into it, we have a shared understanding of like what we can and cannot do and if that's going to work for them or not. On the data connections piece, there's commonality of data inputs that we need to run Atomic. There's actually basically 5 tables. And they're the same 5 tables that everyone pulls into their spreadsheets. It's the good news, right? You got your sales order history, you've got your inventory on hand, your purchase orders outstanding, your sales forecasts, if you have a forecast. We generate the forecast as well. It's kind of this iterative process, but you can pull in your forecast to Atomic. And then item master. Those are the 5 things that live in everyone's planning spreadsheets anyway. And so most of the time that live demo, like just send us the spreadsheet. We have what we need to implement you into Atomic. And so that's where we talk about this instant upgrade to your planning spreadsheet. The challenge becomes, how did they get the data into the spreadsheet in the first place? And what's the quality of the data that they're pulling? And usually always, if you're at the stage where you've implemented an ERP, whether it's like a Fulfill or a NetSuite or whatever, you have some level of trust in that foundational data that you're doing your planning off of. Candidly, where we've run into challenges with clients is that when they're like way earlier than that, hey, we're just getting going here. Like we're doing well. We're at like 5-10 million in revenue, and we have 3 sales channels and 3 3PLs and WMSs, and we're pulling in data, and like our POs are in a spreadsheet. We actually at this point just tell people like in that sequence of planning excellence, right, of how you become really great at thinking of planning as this operational excellence discipline and getting better. Your first stop is making sure that your data is like available and trustworthy. That is actually not what we do. Once your data is available and trustworthy, we can make it sing. We have like so much we can do for you. The fortunate thing is like there's lots of tools that are coming out to help with that. Folks, I'm sure you had like Parabola and other folks who like can come in and help get these things orchestrated. But we've learned that we have to pick our spots there.
Yeah. If you don't know how to master, like, yeah, that's an upstream problem, I guess.
Yeah, or if it's like, hey, like I don't call it any 3PLs in particular, but like, I think we all know who are the most challenging ones. But like, hey, like I just don't trust this number, and I have to like every time I pull it, I have to push it through this other spreadsheet, which like adds this layer of what I know to be true and what not to be true.
Right, the error bars.
Yeah, like it's like we can try to accommodate those sorts of things. We have the flexibility to actually do that. But at some level, if we're constantly in a motion of like the data is wrong, there's only so much you can do until you fix the data. But the good news is like where you're on like a Fulfill or a NetSuite, or you're with a, WMS, so with a 3PL that, has pretty consistent data, you've consolidated your order data into Shopify or another single source. Those connections now are really fast to set up. Like people don't believe us. We're like, no, 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 like we can connect to NetSuite in an hour. Any member of your team can like do this. We'll like share a screen. We'll walk through. It's a very fast connection. It's awesome that that problem has like largely been solved.
What is the KPI that gets your customer out of bed? When someone's like, spreadsheets, we can't do this anymore, or like we're open to a conversation, are they looking to, you know, maximize cash on hand? Are they looking just improve forecasting accuracy? Like more generally, like what's the slam dunk? Like 3 months from now, this is going to improve kind of metric you target it.
It's a hierarchy of needs. And the first and most important one is not being out of stock, for sure. That's the trust deficit. Because if you think from the top of the organization down, the thing that keeps the CEO up at night is growth and revenue. And if you are not able to provide product, like we've done all this work, we built an awesome product, we have an awesome assortment, we've acquired customers, they want our stuff, we can't fulfill that demand for whatever reason. That's why, like your COO or VP of ops get like dragged in front of the board and has to explain, like that's the big blow up. And that is job one and has to be. Then you get into like all of the cascading issues around trust. We want to be able to be in a world where we understand the plan, we understand the decisions that we're making, we hold hands on it because you're always making a trade-off when you're doing planning. It's like, do we believe this forecast? What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens?
We can avoid overstocking, but we might be oversupplied. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And so as like an ops leader, you want to be able to lead that process and lead that conversation to say, here's the signal that we're getting, here's the set of considerations that we're making. Do we all buy into and agree with this logic of why we're making these decisions? And if the plan doesn't go well, which it can, it's not because the way that we framed up that discussion and the data that we had when we were making that decision was wrong. It's that the demand shifted, or there was an issue with our supplier, there was an issue with shipping and tariffs came in, and like there's always disruptions, right? And that's okay. But do we all believe that like when we're making a decision, we're confident in the decision that we're making? When something changed, we all know why we made the original decision, what our options to recover now are. I think that's really like why people make this investment, because they're in a trust deficit, or they're worried that they're going to get into a trust deficit, and they can see how this will pull them out of it. That being said, the metric that's like the slam dunk very consistently is once you now trust your plan, you get to bring down your buffers, right? You don't have to just by default be like, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's like just blow out and hold way more inventory. And so very consistently, we're able to put people on track to save like 30% of their cash out of inventory and achieve those numbers. And so the ROI is insane.
do you have like a waterfall table on there somewhere where it's like, hey, here was our, forecast at this date. Here's how close we got to it. Here's the percentage delta. I'm sure there's a name for that. And
Yeah, totally. Totally. So every plan in Atomic, every time Atomic runs, it takes a snapshot of what was happening in the business. And you can compare any plan to any other plan. So for our clients that we started working with in 2023, we can pull up their January 1st, 2024 plan that has their forecast at that date, that has all of the numbers in the business. And you can look today to that date and say, here's what we thought was going to happen. Here's the decisions that we had teed up. What actually happened? You can do that.
What's like a good accuracy level in your view? And I'm sure it depends on the company and the industry and whatever, but like,
It depends on the time horizon and the level of aggregation. So you can say, I want to look at this for the whole business and like just our top line, or with Atomic, because it runs at the unit level, I can get to a SKU location level and see, here's what we thought at any level of aggregation. So it really depends. At an aggregate level, let's say on like a 3-month horizon, right? You're hoping for plus or minus 10%. Once you start getting down deeper, the error bars go wider. And this was the issue, by the way, at Tesla, where I initially thought or hoped that we could solve this problem through demand forecast improvements alone, right? Like, I need to know what car I need to build because that person is going to be ordering it. So someone in Miami is going to be ordering a Model 3, and I need to have known what that person was going to order so that I can build it at the right time and put it down the right logistics line and like fulfill that order. It's like never going to happen. It's not how forecasting works, right? You can get a certain level of accuracy in your forecasting, and you should push it as far as you can. We have really good models to do that, but there's like a limit there. And so instead, our view is do that and then run it every day or more. Like just run the model all the time, actualize and rebalance and actualize and rebalance and actualize and rebalance. And so instead of like a monthly planning cycle or a weekly planning cycle where you're refreshing and pulling data in from spreadsheets, like every single day you wake up and it's been refreshed and it's telling you like what's the right direction.
I'm curious your take to the extent that I mean, I know as a startup founder, you're mostly just focused on what you're doing, but I feel like the landscape here has been evolving pretty quickly. And there are a lot of startups starting to pop up focused on various parts of, whether it's just PO management, or better statistical demand forecasting, all the way to just like full stack planning, again, kind of more targeting the mid-market. What is your take on this evolution and where do you see it going? Do you think there's enough sort of variation in the space that like different niches will emerge, or do you think there will be consolidation at some point, or is it like kind of too soon to say?
This was a really good question because it speaks to like how we think the space is actually going to evolve and like what do we see. And it's a little candidly like a little bit hard for me to opine on this question, not having like lived in all these spaces, but the cost of creating software has come way down. So it's a lot easier to get started and a lot easier to get out there and, provide value for fellow operators here, which is fantastic. And there's a lot of workflows that are specific to different niches and different verticals where you can build something built for purpose that folks need. There's this big debate with AI, right? Does this create just like massive fragmentation where everyone just has totally bespoke little software applications that fit their need? Or do you find that there's platforms that can be adaptive to the needs and so can take a general solution and make it adaptive to others? We've taken the perspective of the latter, which is we have a general solution that's based on really hard math and really like intense simulation and modeling under the covers. And we can adapt that to the specific workflows and use cases that we've gone out with and found that our clients have. I think time will tell. I'll mention two of the things that are like, I think insanely cool that we're doing with AI right now that like give me a lot of confidence in our approach. So the first is, we have a certain flow that matches an S&OP flow of how the product is architected and how the UI is constructed. Like you go through demand, you have your demand walk, you review the atomic forecast, you lay on your own forecast, you play with the numbers, you lock it. That's awesome. Then you go into supply, you have, your inventory levels, when your runouts are, when you should place your purchases. We respect all your purchase constraints, whatever, you go lock that. There's PO management. You can review your POs and modify and accept the POs and so forth. But it's that like last 20% of customization that we need to be able to support for the product to really be valuable for people. And what we found is we can now do that in our platform because of AI, because we can construct those custom workflows using AI and support them for our clients in like an hour, right? It's like, actually, I have this view in my spreadsheet that I really love. Can you create this view for me? Well, it relies on all the same data that's running through the engine, the underlying like calculation engine that powers Atomic. And so it's just a question of like creating a view for you. Historically, that would be like an engineering sprint, and you're dedicating like a month, maybe a couple sprints to getting it right. And so that, is very hard to justify as a vendor being able to make that investment. We can do that in a couple hours now and provide that view. And so it's like, sure, we can support that. And so most of the time we can, sometimes we can't. I think the other piece, and this speaks to the business logic, is just the back and forth around, we have configured the product in a certain way. Can you make a change? Like a common example is Chinese New Year, right? Like, hey, we don't want to be placing POs that are going to be landing where they're going to need to go and be produced in February or whatever it is in the year, because they're just going to be a month late, and we know it. It's like, how do we pull these things in, right? We are getting that question enough now where, just as an example, we get those sorts of questions all the time, like how do you change the configuration of how Atomic's actually set up? Where now as a user, you can, through chat, talk to Atomic and understand the way in which the data pipeline and the calculations are running under the covers. Atomic will like tell you that. And then if you want to make a change and request a change like that, you can chat in that request. Our agents write the code to make that change, and then our team quickly reviews them and pushes that for you. So it's both like the UI change and the modeling change, being able to be like super responsive to whatever the needs are. And so this comes back to the question, right? Like, do I need vertical or like niche software that has like this Chinese New Year concept in it, just like a small example? Or can I have a general solution that can accommodate that and model that in a really flexible framework? Yeah, I think time will tell.
Thank you for bringing that like explicit example, because I think it's a really compelling way to sort of paint the picture of like, yeah, the platform play, you just has to be a flexible enough platform. So that's really cool.
It's like you have a platform and you have like feature requests, right? So that you've got to, some of those are really fast and some of those are, we do want to dedicate time to it. So
last question, what are you most excited about?
We made an investment this year in the first half. So we raised our seed round in February. And the first thing we did was said, we want to rebuild Atomic, because we've been doing this for like a year now. And our first application launched in January of 24. And we'd been at it for a year, and we're like, okay, we want to rebuild now. We now know enough to know what this needs to be able to do and look like. And Neil and the team spent the first 6 months of this year putting us on a platform that is like insanely fast. The user experience of it's like responsive like Excel or spreadsheets, but then we can onboard folks really, really quickly. So we just onboarded a client. We had done a live demo. We onboarded them. They said, hey, we want to do this, but we want to use it this month for our purchases. I was like, okay, it's the 2nd, right? Like, when do you place your purchase? On the 15th. Let's sign the contract and let's schedule the kickoff for tomorrow. And like, we'll do it. And so they made their purchases using Atomic. It took us 12 days to do the implementation, right? And most of that was them like pulling the data together, right? So I'm like just so excited that we are now in a place where it's fast, it's controllable, like it's end-to-end complete. We've spent a ton of time working with clients, understanding what the needs are. And now we have this thing that like the platform can just fly.
Yeah, it totally makes, that's an awesome one. As anyone who's tried to build a product would know, like the gulf between it works, but not quite the way you want, and it actually like it works and it sings is vast. So
we recently showed Atomic to a client, this new platform that we launched, and she said, you can tell a planner designed this. And it's like the best compliment you can get, right?
That's amazing. Well, that's all the time we have, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is always super fun to talk to you, Charles.
Yeah, for anyone listening, thanks for joining us, and we'll link everything you need to know about Atomic in the show notes. And catch you next time.
Thanks, Charles.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean is produced by StartOps, a growing collection of resources for operations leaders at e-commerce brands. A few of the things we built include a growing, vendor-free Slack community for operators to ask their most important questions and get answers from trusted peers, a job board that curates jobs from 1,500 modern brands, a media hub that includes this podcast as well as articles and templates on a variety of operations topics, and a comprehensive directory of the software and services used by our community members. If you want to learn more, head to startops.network. And to keep up with the latest information from StartOps or catch the most recent episodes of Blue Ocean, follow the StartOps page on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening and hope to catch you next episode.